All right, folks, we just get started, so we'll give everybody a minute or so to cycle over here, and I'll go ahead and start sharing the presentation while we wait. I'll get started very shortly. We're just giving folks a chance to pop in. All right, for those in the eastern part of the U.S. Or beyond, I say good afternoon. I'm Dr. Dave Caudel. I'm the Executive Director of the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at Vanderbilt University. I'm also an autistic and neurodivergent self-advocate. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in my 30s, and I'm the proud father of 3 now young adults on the autism spectrum, not necessarily the same part of the spectrum as me. And for the last 7 years at the Frist Center, it's an organization that's basically researching what is needed for autistic and neurodivergent individuals to find and thrive in meaningful employment from a strengths-based perspective. And so that's been the primary focus of my efforts for the last 7 years. And a part of what we do is we talk to businesses, we talk to schools, we talk to governments, basically any of the stakeholders around autism, neurodivergence, and employment that might be able to help in this endeavor or is in a position of power to where they could help with the right best practices and stuff. And so the talk I'm going to be sharing with you guys today is actually a talk I give quite a bit to companies and corporations and businesses and organizations that are looking to learn more about neurodiversity and neurodivergence and why they should care about it and how should they be thinking about it for their own like faculty, staff, clients who might be neurodivergent. So I imagine quite a few of you are probably already familiar with this, but just to get everybody on the same page, the term neurodiversity itself was coined in the 90s. And it was coined to push back against this myth, this misconception that there's such a thing as a normal brain. In reality, there are diverse ways of thinking. Brain differences are actually normal from individual to individual. The example I often give folks is just think about something as simple as your preference for ice cream. Not everybody's favorite ice cream is chocolate. Not everybody's favorite ice cream is strawberry. Not everybody likes ice cream. That's just one little tiny composite to it. But you know, there are diverse ways of thinking. Brain differences are normal, and the term neurodiversity was sort of coined for that. But at the same time this term was being coined, the autism self-advocate movement was really starting to gain steam. We were getting more and more self-advocates speaking on behalf of autistic people, speaking on behalf of themselves, trying to better educate the public about our needs and accommodations. And they loved the term neurodiversity because, you know, just like diversity, at the same time, there was a lot of talk about diversity and its value in the workplace and its value within organizations. And if you believe that diversity has value, it's a very short step to neurodiversity. But technically, if you're talking about researchers and stuff, if we're looking at somebody with autism or ADHD or dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, and so forth, we often use the term neurodivergent because the question of who is neurodiverse, well, the answer to that is everybody is neurodiverse under the technical definition. And so as scientists, we need to differentiate that. But I always caution people, you know, it's okay to be loose with the language. You know, it all depends on your audience. If you have a company that's trying to do a neurodiversity hiring initiative and they're trying to intentionally hire neurodiverse talent, you don't need to correct them. Like, it's okay that they use the word neurodiversity. In fact, a lot of spaces when people are building things specifically targeting neurodiversity, what they actually mean is neurodivergent, but that's okay. Outside of the lab, outside of academia, the English language is very loose, and the same words mean different things or have multiple different meanings. So I encourage people not to get too wrapped wrapped up around the axle. Now, it's really hard to nail down an exact statistic because the numbers do kind of vary a bit. But if you add up all of, from 10 to 20% of the US population, for example, has dyslexia, about 10% have ADD, ADHD, about 3% have autism, 4% dyspraxia, and about 1% of the others. If you add all that up together, then very roughly speaking, that says about a third of the US population is neurodivergent. And I don't think that's all that different from any other country. A third of the population. And so one of the biggest things I stress to these companies and stuff that are looking to hire neurodivergent talent is, first and foremost, you already have neurodivergent talent throughout your organization, whether you realize it or not. If you don't think that you do, or if everybody says, no, absolutely not, we don't, those are good signs that your organization is not neurodivergent friendly. I promise you they are there. They're probably just afraid to come out and admit the fact that they're neurodivergent out of a very well-deserved fear that maybe people will misinterpret that or think about it negatively and think about them as lesser. Now, as you guys are well aware of, I'm not going to go into the definition of autism for you folks, but one of the things I do try to stress to folks when I'm trying to educate them about the basics is that often when people think about the spectrum and they know very little about what autism actually is, they tend to simplify it into a very linear sort of spectrum, where at one end they would think, oh, normal people like me are not autistic, and then they see somebody who's ASD level 3, moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, non-speaking, minimally speaking, severe sensory issues, and they go, oh, that person is very autistic. And I caution my audience that that can be harmful, because if you move somebody, if you look at me, and I have an autism diagnosis. And so if you think in this very simplistic way, you might go, oh, he doesn't seem to have too many intellectual disabilities. He's got a PhD in physics. So let me move him a little bit down off over this way, and he seems to be able to talk. Let's move him down even further. Like, you can start guessing at somebody and then say, oh, you're not very autistic. You're just a little bit autistic and stuff. And that really does people like me a disservice. There are some challenges and struggles that I deal with. There are some things I just can't do as well as your average person. But you also do a lot of damage to people, with more significant challenges. Even folks with severe intellectual disabilities, non-speaking, big sensory issues and stuff. Even those folks, because of their autism, because of the way their brain is wired, there are some things that they can do as good, if not better than most people. And just assuming that those people are incapable because they have significant challenges, you do them a disservice. So this simpler linear path is doing them a disservice. Now, this isn't all inclusive, but I inform my audiences that this is probably a healthier way to think about the autism spectrum, the fact that it's a multivariable spectrum. And you can imagine that your average person sits somewhere between the origin and the outer edge. So somewhere along this line right here is where your average person would be. And if they come closer to the origin, they would be hypo or less than normal. And if they go closer to the outer edge, they would be hyper or more than normal. So like with sensory sensitivity, your average person might be around here. Some people on the autism spectrum can be very hyposensitive in some ways. One or more of their senses that might almost be like bulletproof, where they can take much greater amounts of stimuli of that particular sense than your average person. This is where stories of an autistic person being hit by a car and it breaks a few bones in his body, and then when the EMT gets there, autistic person's just lying in the street and calmly having a conversation with them while they're checking them. And they're thinking, wow, this person is so stoic and so brave and so awesome to be able to ignore all this pain and just be there. Well, in reality, that person might not be feeling but a fraction of what a normal person would feel. And someone who's hypersensitive is like the squealing of a brake or the cackle in someone's laugh could easily be overwhelming and trigger a sensory meltdown. So I encourage my audience to think that like each autistic individual has, they could be the same as most people, or they could be hypo or hyper on one of these. And from individual to individual, it changes. So you can't just lump us all into a simple term or make some broad sweeping statement about us. It varies from individual to individual. But something we all have in common is that, two or more of these we have some challenge with. And then I educate the business about the basic levels of ASD level 1, ASD level 2, and ASD level 3, what those mean, why we've changed to that. I think at this point, my audience is already aware of just how difficult it is to summarize autism as just a simple little diagnosis that accurately captures everything that this person means. There are some flaws with this terminology. I remember when the terminology came out, there was a lot of people that were upset about it, but the earlier terminologies we had were even less helpful from this one. So as imperfect as it is, I think it's the best we've got. And I don't see anybody, I would be delighted to see if somebody could come up with something better. But I think if you approach these diagnoses in the right context, they make sense. Like all 3 levels of ASD require supports. And ASD level 2s would require conceivably more supports than ASD level 3, or ASD level 1, excuse me. And ASD level 3 would be the most substantial supports. These are the folks that are probably overwhelmingly non-speaking or minimally speaking, moderate to severe intellectual disabilities, or moderate to severe sensory issues. One of the things that's kind of unique about my own autism is I'm like your typical ASD level 1, except I have sensory issues much greater than about 99% of ASD level 1s. As a part of my work at the Frist Center, I sit down and interview people one-on-one to get a sense of how their neurodivergence impacts their lives, what are their challenges, what are their strengths. And as someone who suffers severely from sensory issues, help but ask, how are your sensory issues? How what sort of challenges? And most ASD level 1s had some level of, they might be very particular about the fabric of their shirt, or they might have some, a limited diet based on how sensitive they are to the taste of certain foods, or oftentimes even like just not the taste so much, but the texture of the food, how it feels as you're chewing it and how it feels as you're swallowing it. It's not that uncommon to find some mild sort of sensory issues, but to find people who experience sensory issues to the degree or the extreme that I experience is very rare. And so, I require some supports. Every autistic person I've talked to, there are some supports that if they had those in their life, it would work so much, their life would be so much better, much improved. They'd be more capable if they had those supports. So the big thing I stress to like businesses and such is that we're very capable people. We can do a lot, but you always have to keep in mind that we need some supports. And by the way, all human beings need supports. This is not just autistic people. If you think about the workplace, they keep the temperature at a very specific level. The dress code, the manner in which people interact, what you can and cannot talk about, how you talk to each other. Like all of this has been crafted and designed around the fact that human beings are extraordinarily fragile creatures. And you push us a little bit outside one of our comfort zones and stuff, our quality of life can plummet, our ability to get good work done can plummet, our motivation can plummet. And so the whole workspace has actually been crafted and refined over the decades to try to create the most conducive work environment possible, while still like not breaking the bank and not being too terribly, there's always competing interests that are kind of weighing for that. But the system's been designed pretty well for the neuromajority. The thing we're stressing to them is that it could be better. And oh, by the way, a lot of these changes that would make somebody like me even be able to work there, it turns out is like actually beneficial for the neuromajority as well. In other words, a lot of things that are preventing us from being able to thrive and be successful in these spaces is kind of bugging everybody else. And if you develop a system that sort of like minimizes that, that makes it possible for us to work there, but it also makes it a slightly more conducive, enjoyable environment for everybody else as well. Now this is an infographic I pulled up from an educational site a few years back. And one of the things I love about this graph, first and foremost, this is all true. These are accurate ways of thinking about these neurodivergences and some of the challenges that they have. I think almost everybody on the planet, dyslexia is a much more common neurodivergence than autism. So almost everybody, if they know anything about dyslexia, they know, oh, those folks often have some difficulty with reading or writing. dyscalculia, they have difficulty with math. You know, what I love about this is this is a fine illustration of what we're doing wrong as a society. Yes, all of these things are true. Yes, these folks have these sorts of issues. But if you look at another human being and the only thing you learn about them is what their challenges are, what their struggles are, it's very easy to start thinking of them as inferior or lesser than everybody else. And the big thing I try to stress to my audience is look, every human being without exception has strengths and weaknesses. Each and every one of you has strengths and weaknesses. Imagine you lived in a world where your weaknesses had a label and people heard that label and that's what they thought of you. Oh, you're the person who's not as good as everybody else at X. I think you would justifiably feel like that's not the whole picture. That's not an accurate or fair way to think about me. And so this is one of the things, look, I challenge to my audiences is thinking about someone's difference from a clinical perspective does give some use and context, but you can't stop there. You have to look at the whole person. And here's another infographic. You know, originally in the original work of Mary Colley put this out. You know, these are also true. Is, you know, people with dyscalculia have demonstrated superior verbal skills, truly innovative thinking. ASD, you know, with our hyperfocus, we can be sometimes the best at concentration, fine detail processing. Some of us have extraordinary memory capabilities and stuff. Dyslexia is one of my favorites. Some of the smartest human beings I've ever met on the planet were severely dyslexic. And I got to tell you, you know, the first time I got to know a dyslexic individual who was really, really smart, I was just blown away by this person. This person's brain was like a problem-solving machine. You give him a complex problem, and within moments, he would come up with a really brilliant, innovative, outside-the-box solution that sounds like it could really work. And it was really clever. And you're just like, wow, that's a fantastic solution. But if you had to shoot that solution down for any reason, maybe a variable he didn't account for, or maybe the circumstances are just not going to make that feasible, then he would have a completely separate brilliant solution, and another one, and another one. It's like his brain was a problem-solving machine, but he was also severely dyslexic. And the first time I watched him spell a simple four-letter word, fire, F-I-E-R, like that almost broke something in my brain. I was like, how can someone so smart not know how to spell a simple four-letter word like that? Well, I was able to think that because I don't have dyslexia, but this person did. At first I thought, oh wow, he's just really smart despite his dyslexia. But then I met another really smart person with dyslexia and another one. And then when I got into this work and started learning more about neurodivergences and stuff, I realized, oh, these people are not smart despite their dyslexia. In some ways, they're smart because of their dyslexia, because of the way that their brain is wired. You know, yes, it causes challenges and difficulties in some respects where they struggle more than your average person, but there's a consolation prize to that. You know, in other ways, they can be really clever about things and they can be great problem solvers. And it's not an accident or a coincidence that some of the best scientists that I know, some of the smartest scientists I know, have dyslexia. And the same is true for ASD and a number of other neurodivergences. So that's the really big thing I try to stress to these companies. If you want outside the box thinking, if you want to have some truly innovative solutions and stuff, then you have to create an environment where a neurodivergent person can be a part of that team and thrive and be successful. This statistic is the main reason why the Frist Center exists, why we do the work that we do. You notice I've been talking a lot about neurodivergence. It is the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation. That's what got us into the business, but we're not just thinking about autism, we're thinking about all of neurodivergence. But out of all the neurodivergences, autism is the most severely impacted in terms of over 80% of autistic adults are unemployed or underemployed. And the thing I really try to drive home with these businesses and companies is that includes people with bachelor's degrees, even graduate degrees. I've met some really smart, talented people in their 40s with a master's degree never had a full-time job, or if they got a job, they were like working in a warehouse boxing things, even though, you know, they're really smart people and are really capable of cognitively demanding tasks, because of their differences, and because of the difficulty we have finding meaningful employment, they often end up being unemployed or underemployed. So what are some of the challenges that neurodivergent people, especially those on the autism spectrum, face? You know, one of the big things I try to stress to folks is like, look, in more ways than not, we're human beings, just like everybody else, with all the complexity and nuance that comes with that. But in some very important fundamental ways, we're wired differently than most people. This is true of all neurodivergences to some degree or another. And because of that, that means we might have a very different perspective looking at the same set of information as someone else. We might see it in a very different way. We might notice things that other people miss. We might miss things that are bloody obvious to everybody else. But if your mind works differently, in some ways, language works differently. And I would say, especially for ASD level 1s, probably the #1 challenge they have in the workplace is misunderstandings and miscommunication, where they misunderstand their coworkers, what their coworkers and bosses are trying to say, or what they're trying to communicate, where they in turn get misinterpreted. If they're very blunt and direct, people might be interpreting that as this person's being a jerk, or this person's against me, or this person is trying to start something, you know, or this person just doesn't care about me at all, and they're showing that they think I'm less than human. And people make all sorts of assumptions just based on misconceptions because we use language differently. And so what I stress to folks is that, you know, if you have what you suspect to be a neurodivergent employee or coworker that seems to be blunt, direct, and rude or confrontational, you know, please recognize maybe that person doesn't actually mean to be that way. Maybe that person is just simply trying to communicate. And also, sometimes we don't have the typical reactions to situations that other people have. You know, and that can really set people on edge. The biggest thing I try to stress to the neuromajority is I don't think you folks are even consciously aware of how extraordinarily harsh and judgy you are, that people walk and talk and act in just the right space. You give a little bit more flexibility if you know someone's a foreigner, or if you know someone's from a different culture than yours, then you tend to be a little bit more graceful and accommodating for that. But if you see somebody like me, and we come from the same part of the country, and we have the same sort of accent and stuff, then you make a lot of assumptions. And then suddenly you're extraordinarily harsh and judgy, that I walk and talk and act in just the right way. And the thing is as a neurodivergent individual, that's really hard for me to do. I can do it to small stints. I can do it to a lesser extent, but sooner or later, I'm going to make a mistake. No matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I'm working, I'm going to make a mistake. And if you're coming down on me harshly for that, you know, that's not really fair. You're doing that on the mistaken assumption that your brain and my brain works the same, that we have the same operating system, that we have the same background, that we have the same upbringing. You know, those are dangerous assumptions to make. If somebody does something and you think to yourself, what on earth would possess that person to think that was okay? I kind of wish you'd have like a little voice in your head that goes, you know, maybe this person's brain works differently than mine, or maybe this person doesn't have the same data set that I have. Maybe they have different assumptions. Maybe they're unaware of, you know, in other words, just give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think this is actually useful advice for all of us in all of our human interactions, is that when we're interacting with somebody and they're saying something we don't 100% jive with and stuff, it's kind of useful to kind of take a breath and give people the benefit of the doubt. That benefit of the doubt is a space. If we're given a little extra grace and stuff, I thrive in environments like that. Another challenge that we often face is that because of our detail-oriented way of thinking, and because we're very literal thinkers, we can really get lost in the minutia. This is something I struggle with daily, like having a social conversation with people. And like, I have to remind myself, it's like preparing myself for battle. I was just at another conference yesterday, and you know, I went down to the main floor with the intent of socializing, and I had to be very mindful and intentional of preparing my social brain to be thinking about this, right? Because if I don't, If I just go down there and be my authentic self and we have a conversation, I'm going to tyrannize the conversation. Like, I'll get to talking about something and then I'll want to explain every little detail or side point of that. And then I'm kind of like monologuing and stuff. And then people feel like, oh, I'm not having a conversation with this person. This person is just talking at me. That can generate negative feelings. It can make people less inclined to want to talk to you. Like, it's just not a good strategy for approaching. And so I have to get into my social brain and remember that in conversation, I should be careful to limit my details, no matter how badly I want to share them. I should try to summarize it, keep it short and sweet, and give the other person a chance to participate. And when I'm thinking like that and I'm prepped like that, I can have great conversations with people where we're all having fun, we're all contributing to the conversation. But that's not easy for me because it's not how my brain is wired. I want to have an hour-long discussion about one little sub-point and all the complex nuance of it. If I'm with another autistic person who has the same obsession, no problem. Like, we can just talk in circles forever and be having the time of our life. But you know, this is the thing I stress to companies, is one of the most common things I hear about a challenge or a difficulty is in the tech world with autistic coders, autistic programmers. I often hear that they end up wasting a lot of time and they end up working too long on something. A very common example with companies like Ernst & Young, they have a client that comes to them to build a bit of software or something, to do something, and they take their Neurodiversity Centers of Excellence, one of their autistic employees, whose job it is to write these bits of code for other people, and that person might spend an hour building code that does the job. It does the job with 90% efficiency, and the client is happy with it. Ernst & Young is happy with it. Everybody's happy with it. The one person who's not happy with it, the autistic programmer, because that person is getting caught up in the details of the coding and stuff and thinks, oh, well, I could change this and change that and work around. And that person wants to spend another 20 hours refining that code so it goes from 90% efficient to maybe 95 or 96, or, you know, the goal is 100%. That's what we're always shooting for. And they don't want to let it go. They just want to, they want to work on it. They're anxious that the code is not as good as it could be. And this is frustrating for a company that's paying that person money to provide a service, and they only wanted him or her to work for 1 hour on a project, and this person now wants to spend like 20 hours on that project. You know, there's a very common thing I used to get is, how do we talk to them? How do we snap them out of that? Like, what's a good strategy? And I'm like, you know, first of all, just be a little empathetic, sympathetic. This person, it's one of the reasons why this person is so good at coding, is because they're so driven to be the best they can be, and they're so driven to make the code as perfect as possible. So you pull them aside and you say, hey, look, I recognize you've got that in you. You've got that drive. And I know that you would love to spend another, 10, 20 hours making this as good as possible. But what you originally created was good enough for our client, which by definition is good enough for us. And we have other projects we need you to work on. So I know it's not easy for you, but you got to let it go and you got to move on to the next thing. Recognizing that and just being a little empathetic to how much of a difficulty that can be, you can help guide that person to let it go and move on to the next thing. And it wasn't just you on high, just shouting orders and expecting blind obedience, but you were showing that you had a bit of empathy and compassion and understanding. And that, that can be such a game changer for an autistic employee to feel like, oh, wow, my boss really gets me. It really understands the struggle over here. And they're looking out for my best interest and they're trying to help me. That can ease anxiety and stress in a lot of other ways, cause that person to open up to you a little bit more. And the thing is that we all need some level of mentorship. We all need some help in acclimating to a work environment and figuring out what's what and how to fit into that society and how to be an effective member of a team. That's a human thing that everybody has. For the neuro majority, from my perspective, they just have this magical ability to just walk into a place and just yada yada their way into competency. They just sort of by osmosis or something pick it up around them. And so a lot of companies don't really put a lot of thought or effort into how to intentionally and methodically teach that culture and teach those best practices to those folks. That's the thing I stress to these companies. You got to be more mindful and intentional about it. We need that as well. And unfortunately, we can't just osmotically absorb it from the people around us. We need somebody who's willing to answer our questions and indulge our detail-oriented thinking and stuff. As we're trying to figure it out for ourselves, we need help the same as everybody else. And so if you're a bit knowledgeable about how our brain works and best practices to talk to us, that can make the world of difference. So this is what I was talking about a little bit before, having some basic understanding. You know, one of the things I stress, this is true for all neurodivergents, especially autism, but all neurodivergents. The best way, if you talk to somebody who you're aware that they're some aspect of their brain might be working differently, or they might use language a little bit differently, it's really best to be very clear and concise with your language. In other words, say what you mean as much as possible. Try not to be vague or cheeky, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say one thing and mean something else, say something and mean the opposite. Like, it's really best to just kind of come out and say it. And if you feel like the other person is being too blunt or direct, you know, you should in part realize that person may not realize that how they're affecting people with the way they're talking and stuff. Try to make the assumption that they didn't mean anything by the tone and they were just trying to say what they said. But if they're beyond the pale, if they're really rubbing you or other people the wrong way, what a great opportunity to pull them aside and say, hey, you know, I get what you were trying to say there, but the way you said it was very combative. And if I get that might not have been your intent, but that's how a lot of people received it. And you can really ruffle a lot of feathers and upset people. Like, let's coach perhaps a little bit on a better way that you could have said that, or a more neutral way that you could have said that. A lot of us on the autism spectrum who are successful in the work environment and stuff, I had kind-hearted souls in my past pull me aside and have very pointed conversations with me that helped me to come to an understanding of how I was being interpreted. And I was, you know, at first I was very angry about how people were interpreting me, because that was wrong. That's not what I meant, and therefore I'm a bit upset at you that you took it the wrong way. And then I had to take a breath and realize people don't get to really choose so much how they, you know, they're trying to interpret their environment the same as everybody else. They're trying to interpret what's going on around them. If I'm really upset about how people are interpreting me, or I feel like people are misinterpreting me, well, then part of that is on me to learn better ways to interact with people, or learn ways to sort of like avoid some of those misunderstandings and stuff. And the same, I go for them. Like, the big reason why I'm a self-advocate and talk about these issues is so I can go to my colleagues and stuff and say, hey, you know, I'm struggling with this because my mind is wired a bit differently. And in some ways it's kind of difficult for me to understand you. And so, like, I would really appreciate it if you try to be a little bit more blunt and direct than you normally are. Or could you answer some of my clarifying questions and stuff? And please be patient with me. The details matter to me much more than they do most people, but they are important to me. So please indulge me a bit. Yeah, I've been able to generally work out a way to kind of get along with people and communicate with people effectively. You're never going to do it 100% of the time. You're always going to find there are always those people in the world who honestly believe there are two ways of thinking, my way and the wrong way, and are not interested in seeing another point of view, or not willing to welcome. Those people exist, unfortunately. Don't ever make the assumption that who you're talking to is that person, because more often than not, we make that assumption when in reality it's just a misunderstanding. But certainly, if you're trying everything and it's just not working, at that point, then you think, okay, maybe this is one of those people, and maybe I should just move on. The goal is not to avoid all misunderstandings. This is a very common thing that Aspies in particular struggle with. Like, we just want to be perfect. We want to never make a mistake again. We want to never do something wrong again, so then we could live a stress-free life. Oh, what a utopic existence that would be. So sometimes when we get in there, we get so wrapped around the axle about not making mistakes that when we do make mistakes, we really freak out about it. And the thing is that you have to remember you're a flawed human being with biases and misconceptions. You're trying to do the best you can with what you've got, but making mistakes is just a part of the process. And when you make mistakes, it's not a bad thing in and of itself that you made a mistake. You can correct from mistakes. People don't judge you based on how flawless and perfect you are. They tend to judge you on how well you handle your mistakes. You should judge yourself more on how you handle mistakes and less on the fact that you even did make mistakes. But when you make a mistake and there's like a misunderstanding or something like that, you know, try to lean in on that. If you did hurt somebody or upset somebody, then just be open and honest and say, hey, I wasn't trying to do that. No, like that wasn't my intent. I'm sorry for what I've done, but I want to make things better. You know, if you tackle it with that sort of attitude and stuff, you'd be amazed at how much further you can get in communicating with folks. So I told you guys a little bit about the Frist Center before. We're a multidisciplinary research organization. I like to think of this as a nexus point. I tell, you know, anything related to autism, neurodivergence, and employment, it's not like we have all the answers or we do everything ourselves. Absolutely not. But we are one of the most well-connected organizations in this space. And if I can't help you with a particular issue, the chances are really good I know someone who can. And we're always happy to connect people to resources and stuff. But our actual day-to-day job is, as I said before, we're researching what is needed for neurodivergent and autistic individuals to find meaningful employment and thrive in meaningful employment from a strengths-based perspective. That is our research mandate. That's what we're doing our research for. It's multidisciplinary. I think when a lot of people think about autism research, they're probably thinking about psychology and neuroscience, looking at the nuts and bolts of the human brain and the aspects of that's part of our nature. And that's really important research. And certainly we have research teams that are doing that bare bones, you know, basic building block sort of research. But we also have researchers in the School of Business who are looking at, you know, what are some of the changes we can make to the workplace? How can we better train the next generation of leaders to be more inclusive and more effective at being leaders of autistic neurodivergent employees? And we also have researchers in the School of Engineering that are looking at technologies and innovations, like a driving simulator designed to help you know, autistic individuals, for example, of those of us who are capable of having driver's licenses versus those of us who actually have driver's licenses is a shockingly small statistic. There are far too many of us who are capable of driving, but we never learned how to drive, in part because the normal ways of teaching people how to drive don't work well for us. And so we have some technologies under Nilanjan's lab that has been designed specifically aimed at how we learn. And by the way, the goal is not to create an army of Uber drivers, autistic Uber drivers. That's not our goal. We recognize that if you live in a place like Nashville and you don't have your own means of transportation, it's hard to have meaningful employment, to have a full-time job. So it's one of those barriers to success. So we're not just thinking about in the workplace itself, but anything that could have an impact on your work. And so I'll be opening this up to questions and answers in a minute, but I'll leave this up for just a little bit. The thing I'm always stressing to people is, like, look, we're happy, willing, and able to talk to anybody. If you're an organization or an international corporation who is looking to hire or better serve neurodivergent talent, we're happy to talk to you. If you're an autistic individual who's just having problems with work or problems finding work, we're happy to talk to you. If you're an individual who has come to realize that you might be neurodivergent and it's having some sort of impact on your work-life balance, we're happy to talk to you. Even if you're someone within the neuromajority, and you think that you have a friend or a colleague or a loved one or a coworker or an employee who might be neurodivergent, and you're just trying to do best by them, and you're trying to figure out best practice and stuff, we're happy to talk to you. We haven't turned down anybody yet. We're always happy to talk to folks. So if you know anyone who has any questions or is seeking any help in those regards, please feel free to send them to our website. I do apologize, it's in the process of a rework, so we're still ironing out the kinks, but one of the things that definitely works is the contact us. You can reach out to Colette and we'd be happy to chat. And please share this with others as a resource. So I will, with that, stop my sharing. And I apologize for the perspective. My camera is not playing nice with this, so I'm not actually this skinny. I need to be stretched out a little bit, but that's okay. We'll make it work. And so I will open up the floor to anybody who has any questions. And you're welcome to raise your hand. I'll try to figure that out. Or you can put something in the audience chat, or you can even mouse over my window and send me something directly. Ah, awesome. Stephanie, welcome.
Hi. I'm a late diagnosed female, 54, got diagnosed last year. The struggle is really real.
Congratulations.
Cyber security. I've been in it for the past 10 years. It's been a brutal experience for me. Major bullying, major harassment. I'm on short-term disability right now, trying to recover from my most recent experiences. What recommendations do you have? Is there anything out there for mentorship? I have not had a mentor in 8 years, and I'm actually on the verge of leaving technology altogether, even though I'm wired for it, just because I'm out here by myself, and it's just
I feel that.
Increasingly bad and hard.
Yeah, I totally feel that.
Book, but I'm not going to be negative in it, and want to get into advocacy, but I'm still trying to struggle to keep a roof over my head.
Yeah, I feel that. Well, first and foremost,
and I can drive.
I want to say,
I was raised neurotypical and had never knew.
First of all, I want to say congratulations for the diagnosis.
Thank you. It meant the
world.
What's
crazy, I got my diagnosis when I was in my 30s. It was a shock to learn that my weirdness had a name, and other people out there have the same sorts of struggles I have. Yeah. I never would have guessed at that. And at the time, everybody acted like someone had died, or I'd found out I had a disease or something like that. And it was one of the greatest things to ever happen to me. It answered questions that I'd been struggling with my whole life. It led me to a deeper understanding. And so I always make a great effort to say congratulations to somebody when they get a diagnosis. Because I feel like there's so much, you were always that, whether you have the label or not, whether you have the understanding, you always had those struggles. It's nice to know. We Aspies, we like to know. I have sat down and interviewed over 500 individuals on the autism spectrum, enough to say everything you've said is so utterly common and typical and normal for an autistic individual in the space that you're in and the kinds of challenges that you have. I mean, in terms of like bullying and stuff, one of the most ubiquitous things that draw all of us Aspies together is you get us together and you get us to start talking about bullying. You get some pretty hair-raising stories from school and sometimes work environments and stuff. The short answer, and I'm trying to be mindful and respectful of everybody else who might want to have a question or have a comment. The short answer is the struggles that you're having are very common, and we work with people like you all the time. So reach out to the Frist Center, schedule something with Colette. We'll sit down and have a one-on-one Zoom meeting where I learn a little bit more details. And then those things you're asking for, I'll do my best to connect you to those resources.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it. I never really experienced bullying until I joined tech, and thought I was finally going to be in my space, and was shocked to discover, even though I was warned, being a female coming into it, I wasn't expecting it. Yeah. So it's been really hard.
Is this the only place that you've ever worked at, or have you worked at a variety of places?
This is my 4th career.
Okay.
So I've been working in the technology space for probably about the last 20. I started off in web design and then moved into security because that was always my passion. And I'm not trying to take up too much time, but it's just been really difficult dealing with mostly neurotypical men, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, there are 2 tiers to it. We tend to get bullied just because like we rub people the wrong way, or there's something off about us. But also some workplace environments are just toxic in general. Like sometimes it's not just us, like everybody's being toxic to everybody. Sometimes it's just a really bad work environment. And unfortunately those are far more common than we would like. There are some things that you can do in both those situations, if not to make the situation better, than to at least survive it better yourself. But myself personally, once I make the determination that the work environment itself is toxic, and it's not just like, personality conflicts, but like the whole structure itself. Once I figure that out, yeah, I'm dusting off the resume and I'm looking for the next place.
Gotcha.
We're too old. We're too old.
Oh my God, right?
And
Yeah.
we can't change everything. But even then, I am trying to do what I can to at least be a positive force in that mess, and at least try to move the needle in the right direction and stuff. Yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you about that.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it because I'm trying to do the same myself.
Well, the struggle is real. Hang in there. I'm looking forward to the
thanks.
chat.
You too. Appreciate it.
Let me see. I'm showing a thing that says, oh, okay, never mind. I think that's just the backstage for the next people. Does anybody else have any other questions? You're welcome to put it in chat. You're welcome to send me a direct message. Let me see, I got 2 notifications. Okay. All right. Let me see. Oh, there won't be anything in announcements. I'm thinking maybe I should come up with a short story to give people, if anybody's trying to formulate a question and they haven't quite worked it out, I'll give you guys a few more minutes to try and figure that out. And in the meantime, she talked about she had 4 different careers. I think there's a lot, especially those somebody who's in here. Hi, Colette.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Will be 79 next month, so this technology. And I had to, I needed to get a COVID shot today, so I just logged in and I didn't get to hear your presentation.
Oh.
I just logged in. And I saw that this time of day, was supposed to be at the 6th speaker, so I went there. So, I don't know. Yeah, the bullying thing is I found out exactly what you said. I have been in what I call healthy environments, and then I thrive. I mean, I got a superior rating when I adjudicated disability claims, and I worked for 10 years in a school system that was excellent with special needs kids. And I have letters of recommendation galore from there. But then other times I was in jobs where it was very toxic, and I thought I wasn't diagnosed, and I just thought I should be able to handle it. Well, no, I've decided that, at interviews, instead of trying to get the job, which was always my motivation, and I don't know why, because I have social anxiety, but interviews were always very easy for me, and I'd always get the job. But no, I've decided now, I usually like to work, but I just moved, so I haven't been working. I like to work, even though I'm 79. It gives me purpose.
Yeah.
Right now, I just moved, and I need some time to catch up. But I decided at interviews I need to ask questions about why did the last person leave? And, I don't know what other questions. There are all kinds of books on mobbing, emotional abuse in the American workplace. And I wrote to one author, but I don't know, she was older than me. She really helped me when I was mobbed once at a job. And, but I wrote to her, and once I got my diagnosis at age 72, I asked her, to me, you were describing me in this book. I'm autistic. Have you found that this book is about autistic people? But I didn't hear from her. She's in a different country, and I think she was older than me. So, I mean, I don't know. Her website is still there.
Yeah, one of the things I love to, when I'm educating the public about this, one of the things I like to stress to them is like, look, in reality, autistic traits are really just human traits. Every autistic trait you can imagine is really just an extreme of human, like fidgeting is an example. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who has never once in their life tapped their foot or fidgeted a little bit with a pen when they were nervous or stressed out. Like there's something about that. There's something about that process that just sort of like kind of bleeds some of the excess energy away, or kind of helps us cope with what we're dealing with. I'm like, okay, so you see the person who's like rocking or flapping their arms or twisting around, like it's the same sort of thing. It's just they need it more, or they do it to a greater extent than most people, and that's what looks odd to people. But in and of itself, it's intrinsically human. And so, you know, a lot of our challenges and struggles, the things that can really ruin our day or stop us from moving forward, more often than not, even within the neuromajority, you find that sort of thing bugs them as well. You know, maybe they can rise above, maybe they can find a way to ignore it and just sort of like put up with it or grit their teeth and kind of go through. And we might have less bandwidth for that because it's affecting us so much more than it is other people. But one of the things that really excites me about this work is we've seen time and time again, you go into a workplace, you intentionally make it accommodating and inclusive for neurodivergent talent. You're specifically designing systems around that makes that an environment where I can thrive and be successful. More often than not, the vast majority of times, even the neuromajority employees come into that environment and say, I like this better. This works better for me. Like I prefer, like you create an environment that's less toxic and where people are a bit more respectful of each other, or people have more of a team mindset and they're trying, like that is the kind of place like we need to be thrive and be successful. But even people within the neuromajority goes, oh, this is so much better than all that backbiting and stuff. That was so exhausting and stuff.
Yeah, I think too, I've found the more educated people are. I was living in housing where nobody was like, I have a master's from a Big Ten university, graduate with honors, but I ran into trouble a couple of times, not realizing that I should just leave. But anyway, so my income is not like a master level person. Right. But I was living in this apartment building. I'm sorry, there's a lot of noise outside. I'll have to shut the slider. Where nobody had a degree of any sort at all. There were people with felony records and personality disorders and everything. I mean, oh my God, it was horrible.
You know, this very topic I've been thinking about quite a bit. You know, it's one, you know, like why did I grab it? Once I found academia, and I didn't find academia until I was in my 30s. It wasn't until my 30s I decided to give this college thing a try. But when I found academia and got into academia, particularly like professors and stuff like that, I found those people to be more open-minded than the general public. Yes. I was more easily able to sort of like connect with them. Yes. And it's one of the things that drew me to academia, and it's why I'm so happy in academia now, because I'm surrounded by people that I can more easily get along with. And I think it kind of comes down to this. I think it's a very human thing. We're all guilty of this at one time or another, where we make the assumption that the people around us are experiencing the world the same way we do. With the weaknesses.
That was my problem.
You know, we have
that theory of mind.
We have and the thing is that somebody who is educated, especially someone who's gotten a graduate degree, has had shoved in their face and rubbed back and forth the reality, the fact that not everybody sees the world the same way, that there are different perspectives, different ways of thinking about things, different ways of approaching problems, and that your way may not necessarily be the best. We're kind of like, we face that so much that I think it just broadens our horizons, and we start to recognize, oh, there might be multiple, even if we're not thinking about this consciously, we recognize that a different viewpoint isn't necessarily bad or isn't necessarily inferior. Like it kind of opens us up and primes us to the fact that there might be a better way or a different but useful way of approaching things. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and just think about how hard, like I'll be honest with you, that was a bit of a shock to me when I first started to learn that and first started to see that. And then I realized, oh, the world is so much bigger than I thought it was. Human cognition is so much bigger than I thought it was. And it helped open my eyes to that possibility. And I'd like to think it made me a better person in terms of like, I'm still working on this, but you know, when someone expresses an idea that you just think is wrong-headed, or the expressive viewpoint that looks like sheltered or obviously missing something or something like that. Like, I'm trying to be more graceful in those situations, because we're all just trying to do the best we can with what we have. And it is, I think it's a shock, a big shock to a lot of people when they first learn my way is not the only way. And some people never learn that lesson. And if they stay a bit siloed in their cliques, and they stay a bit siloed in terms of their education and learning about the world and stuff, they can go their entire lives with that misconception. And so there's a lot of people who have misconceptions out there and stuff. And that's, you know, I try to treat those people with a bit of grace, and I try to have a bit of empathy and try to gently nudge them to the possibility that there might be other ways. And I recognize that that's a tall ask. So I don't expect the world of someone who's like, you know, always been in the working class, is really struggling to make ends meet and just trying to survive. I recognize that trying to get that person to expand his consciousness in a single conversation is something is a really tall ask. And it's probably better to just do it in little drips and drabs. And if they're not coming along for the ride, not to judge them too harshly for it. Because for some people, it takes overwhelming evidence before they come to that conclusion. And then it is virtually a cataclysmic conclusion. Like, it changes their perspective of the world. It changes their perspective of the species. That's a tall ask. And so we have to have some patience about that. Well, we got just a couple minutes left. Thank you so much to those of you who attended my talk. I hope you guys got something of it. I'm having fun in the summit and listening to some of the other speakers speak.